Hello, I'm Barry Daniel, and this is the podcast of the Middle Way Society. Our aim is to encourage a universal approach to living a more integrated, ethical life, avoiding dogma or any appeal to authority. My guest today is the biologist and research scientist Rupert Sheldrake. He's the author of more than 80 technical papers and numerous books. He's perhaps most well known for his book The Science Delusion and his Morphic resonance hypothesis. He's going to talk to us today about science as an integrative practice, a method as opposed to a belief system. Hello Rupert, welcome to the Middle Way Society podcast.
Yes, good to be with you.
Okay, well it's been around 3 years now since you published The Science Delusion, which offers a central challenge to the way that the mechanistic model has continued to dominate Western science, despite that model's inability to explain a wide range of evidence. Could you elaborate briefly on that challenge and what impact you think the book has had?
It's been 2 years since it came out, actually.
Okay.
What I do in the book is take the 10 dogmas of contemporary science and turn them into questions and look at how well they pan out if you examine them scientifically.
Yeah.
The answer is none of them come out very well. And my point really is that the science as a method of inquiry is fine, but science as a dogmatic belief system or worldview is not fine. It's become a constrictive, it's, I think, a bad influence on our whole civilization, and it's moreover bad for science itself. And the current orthodoxy of science is essentially philosophical or scientific materialism.
Yeah.
It's an ideology rather than a scientific hypothesis. So what I'm saying is we'd be better off without it, and science could be liberated and become much more interesting and creative.
Okay. We find dogma in all fields of human endeavour, such as politics, the arts, religion, as well as science. However, your contention that many aspects of science is dogmatic, and particularly this materialistic view, has met huge resistance in some quarters. What do you put this down to?
Well, the reaction I've had to this book is, it's obviously provocative to materialists, so it's not surprising some of them have reacted against it. On the other hand, there's been a very widespread, thoughtful and positive response from many people, including many in the scientific world. The only thing is that most of them don't dare say so in public because, the dogmatic materialists are indeed dogmatic and aggressive. Most dogmatic materialists are militant atheists, and militant atheists are people who are, on the whole, angry with religion for one reason or another. So they're carried along by that ideology, and they resist any challenge to this ideology. They base their case on science. They say they're speaking in the name of science. The trouble is they're not being very scientific about it. So they tend to get angry when it's challenged. So I think the reason they're so angry is because, well, first of all, they're angry in the first place to be militant atheists, and ordinary atheists. There are plenty of ordinary atheists who aren't angry, but they're not militant. My point really is that the ones who've made the most fuss are the militant atheists, and I think that's because this challenges their worldview. Most people are not militant atheists, including most atheists, and many people take this as a reasonable case to discuss and don't have any problem with it.
Okay, so what does a science free from dogma look like? And how does it address conditions better?
Well, of the 10 dogmas, let's take one or two, for examples. One of the dogmas is the idea that memories are stored inside the brain. And that follows from materialism, because everything about the mind has to be material for materialists. So thought has to be nothing other than the activity of the brain. Memories have to be nothing but material objects or structures in the brain. So that's why materialists think memories are stored in the brain. They assume they are. Now, the 100 years of research have been done trying to find out where these memories are. And that research has been extraordinarily unsuccessful. The memory traces, the putative memory traces, have been elusive over and over again. So what's restricting science, really, is the assumption that even though they haven't been found, they must be there, and the only valid kind of research on memory must be based on memory traces. Whereas the alternative theory of memory, one that I'm suggesting on the basis of morphic resonance, and indeed one that's been suggested by several philosophers as well, is that memory is more like a resonance process, that your mind is resonating with your own mind in the past. It's a resonance across time. The brain is more like a TV receiver tuning into memories than a video recorder storing them. Now, of course, brain damage can lead to loss of memory, like in Alzheimer's disease, degeneration of the brain, or strokes, or concussion, or head injuries. But that doesn't prove the memories in the brain, because if I damage your TV set and it affects the pictures or the sound, it doesn't prove all those pictures and sounds originate inside the TV set. It does show that the bits of the set I've damaged have something to do with the production of the pictures and sound, but it doesn't prove they're all stored there. And the same goes for memory. So what I'm saying really is that if we didn't have the dogma memories must be stored inside the brain, then we could look at memory in a more open-minded way and explore the possibility it really does depend on resonance. And that would open up a whole range of new possibilities, including seeing normal personal memory as different in degree from collective memory rather than different in kind, because both of them would depend on resonance. Personal memory is a bit more specific and collective memory is less specific. And it would also open up a new way of thinking about rebirth or reincarnation, because what those phenomena show in cases where children remember things that have happened in previous lives, what those show is that there's a transfer of memory from one life to another. What they don't show is that that memory proves that the same individual unit soul moves from one life to another. But so you see, this opens up a whole new set of discussions and debates which are scientific and philosophical and even religious, which are all closed down by the dogmatic assumption of materialism.
So, just to open that into a more general question, what for you makes a judgment reasonable?
What kind of judgment?
Well, we could focus on a scientific judgment that's reasonable. What makes a judgment better than another? Because if you look at dogma is almost based on the idea that that's the case because that's the case. It's circular in a sense, a dogmatic position. How, from a scientific method point of view, is a judgment reasonable?
Well, it's a bit hard to answer that in a completely abstract sense. But let's take the case of memory, since I've just been talking about it. How would you judge whether memory really is stored inside the brain or not? Well, the dogmatic assumption is, of course it is, and to suggest anything otherwise is rubbish and nonsense and proves there's something wrong with you. Yeah. Well, obviously that doesn't get us very far. But if we say, well, maybe it's not, let's look into it, then one way of finding out would be to look at the evidence and then to do experiments to see if there could indeed be a transfer of memory from one mind to another. And one of the experiments that I talk about in my book, and one that I've actually done, is to do with rats. You train rats to learn a new trick in one place, and morphic resonance theory predicts that rats all around the world learn the same thing quicker just because the rats have learned it, say in London. There's a transfer of memory. Now that wouldn't be expected on the memory trace theory. There does already seem to be some evidence that actually happens. So if there's more evidence, and if it looks pretty conclusive this is really going on, I think this would favour the idea memories are not stored in the brain and enable us to make a more informed judgment about that, based both on logic and general philosophical considerations, and, in the case of science, especially on empirical evidence.
Okay. What do you think are the philosophical implications of recognizing that the limitations of these current scientific models. You've spoken recently about, we're potentially maybe entering into a new paradigm in terms of science.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of philosophical implications. I mean, the most important, I think, really, is the challenge that going beyond materialism poses to the materialist assumptions about consciousness. And the materialist theory is that there's nothing but matter in reality, or sometimes they say there's nothing but physical reality, by which they mean matter, energy, and fields, the stuff of physics. Now, what that means is that the brain is what's doing the thinking. The brain is the basis of our consciousness, and consciousness has no reality over and above the activity of the brain. It's nothing but a product of material activity. Now, that gives the idea that we have no free will. Our minds are confined to the inside of our heads. Our memories are stored in our brains. When we die, everything just goes blank because our brains decay and therefore all mental activity and memories cease with it. And it also gives the idea that the universe has evolved by blind chance because there's no higher purpose and no conscious guidance to the evolutionary process, and that the entire evolutionary process is purposeless. Now, that's actually a pretty depressing point of view, and I think it's not surprising that the characteristic disease of modern scientific societies is depression. I mean, it's endemic in all modern advanced societies. And we have a worldview which is deeply depressing. Our minds are just isolated inside the privacy of our skulls, and so on. Now, if we move beyond that, we see that consciousness doesn't just have to be the activity of the brain. It's not just something that mysteriously appears in brains. Maybe consciousness pervades the whole universe. Maybe all material systems, self-organizing systems from atoms to galaxies, have some kind of mind or mental process. It leads us into a completely different view of the world and a different experience of the world as well. It makes a big difference if you think that your mind is linked to other minds and that they're in turn connected to greater or higher levels of mind, and that we live in a living universe rather than a dead mechanical one. It makes a very big difference to the way you lead your life.
No, but interesting. Can I just make a quote from the Middle Way Society's chair, Robert Ellis? He said, could it be argued that we are potentially now entering a third phase of human thought? In the first medieval phase, scientific objectivity was limited by subjection to moral metaphysics. In the second modern phase, conclusions were drawn by relating observation to theory, and ethics was made irrelevant. In the third phase of human thought, which he hopes may be dawning, science and ethics will be seen as unified, with objective judgment in each following a process of balancing out models with the chances of those models being wrong. I don't know how that resonates with you.
I'm not sure how it does myself, actually. I sort of slightly go blank at the concept of ethics because it's a bit too abstract for me to grasp.
Okay.
I'm not sure, though, that, if we have a post-materialist science, one thing it shows is that we're all interconnected, and we're interconnected with the natural world. And I suppose that does have ethical implications. But it's not. The quote's a little bit obscure to me because I'm not familiar with the kind of philosophical, ethical background to what he's talking about. So I'm sorry I don't have any clear response to it.
No, that's fine. But do you see a clear distinction between, for example, facts and values and emotion and reason, or do you think they're inextricably linked in some way?
Oh, I think they're very much linked. I think even in science, there's this pretense that science is totally objective and value-free and just about facts, but that's obviously not the case. I mean, if you look at the ways what scientists actually do, in order to do their science at all, they have to have grants. Yeah. And as soon as you read people's grant applications, on page 1, you'll find they're making a pitch for this work to be useful and beneficial to humanity. Give us more money to investigate the molecular biology of cell division, and we'll find a cure for cancer and alleviate human suffering. That kind of thing. Or give us a way to investigate new kinds of semiconductors or superconductivity, and we'll find better ways of communication so humans can be more efficiently linked together through communication systems. In other words, the reason that people are doing the science in the first place, discovering the facts, is because before they've done research, they've convinced somebody else that it's something to do with values, that it has value in the human sense. If they started their grant proposals by saying, we're finding out objective facts which have no relevance to any human concern and will be totally useless from the point of view of humanity, which is unfortunately the case, and I'm afraid with a lot of scientific research, but if they actually said that, they wouldn't be able to do it because they wouldn't get the grant.
So would you say that, say for example, a scientist potentially came up with an idea that could be very destructive to the planet or whatever, do they have a moral decision to actually think twice there? Because often scientists say, well, this is pure science. We don't get involved with the ethical side of things.
Well, that's what scientists have tended to do, and certainly the people who developed the atom bomb, the hydrogen bomb, the Star Wars program, and so on, let themselves off the moral hook to a large degree by saying that, they just provided the facts and the bombs, and it was the politicians that decided to use them, so it wasn't really their decision. But, that's not terribly convincing. Yes, I think that I think science can have huge effects, but the thing is that you don't always know the consequences.
Yeah.
So, for example, when people discovered vaccination as a way of preventing infectious diseases, on the face of it, that seemed like a really good idea, and it was a really good idea. We've all benefited from it.
Sure.
But one consequence of that is that the human population has exploded. There's now billions more people on the planet than would have been without vaccination, because that was the main way of reducing infant mortality and of indeed preventing epidemics or reducing epidemics. And the result of billions more people on the earth than there might otherwise have been has been massive ecological destruction, a threatening of the living planet, extinction of countless other species, etc. So even people who thought they were doing what seemed like an absolutely unadulterated good were issuing in effects which many people would consider undesirable, like ecological destruction and mass extinctions.
That's quite an uncomfortable thought, actually. Just a question again about morphic resonance. How could morphic resonance advance from being a hypothesis into being a theory? Will it need to explain, for example, in what circumstances telepathy does not occur?
Well, morphic resonance isn't primarily about telepathy. It's more primarily about memory and the inheritance of memory, instinct, and form.
Okay.
Telepathy is... So morphic resonance is from the past to the present. Telepathy is something that happens in the present. I think it is a kind of resonance phenomenon, but it's a bit different from morphic resonance. I think the main way it would advance from being a hypothesis to a theory is through more research on it and accumulation of further evidence. At the moment, there hasn't been very much research because it's too controversial and people are frightened to work on it. A lot of people are interested, but it's hard to get grants, and people are afraid of their careers being ruined if they do something unconventional. There's a lot of fear within science that inhibits creative endeavour, not just in this, but in other areas too. But say there was overwhelming evidence for morphic resonance in physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, and so forth. Say that it could be applied technologically in morphically resonant devices, say analog computers with a kind of morphic resonance memory. There are possible technical applications quite a way down the line. Then I think it would become a widely accepted theory. At that stage, there'd be it's hard to say exactly at which stage because there's no sharp dividing line between a hypothesis and a theory. But it would be part of a paradigm shift from the mechanistic materialist view of nature to a more organic, integrative view of nature.
Okay. Well, my last question, Rupert, what is your understanding of the middle way, if any?
Well, I haven't thought about it very much. I'm not a Buddhist practitioner myself. I'm actually a Christian, an Anglican. And I see it as something like the Greeks had the idea of the golden mean, and I think every kind of reasonable view has the idea there's a kind of moderation between extremes that we should follow, that extremism of one kind or another is bad and leads to trouble. And in terms of morphic fields, the whole view of nature I have is that organisms consist of integrated balance within the organism, and an animal or plant has to have all the parts working together harmoniously to function properly. A society has to have that, an ecosystem has to have that. On the other hand, disruptive change is at the basis of evolution, so one can't totally rule out that. If it hadn't been for an asteroid hitting the Earth, causing mass extinction of the dinosaurs, there wouldn't have been the evolution of mammals, and we wouldn't be here to talk about it. So if there hadn't been ice ages causing extremes of climate and enormous climatic fluctuations, a lot of recent evolution over the last few 100,000 years might not have happened, and humans, as we know, humanity might not have emerged. So one has to be also aware of a kind of disruptive element in history and in evolution. But for leading a balanced human life, I think some kind of middle way seems, and most people think, a good idea.
I suppose from our position as well, the middle way is a principle that can help us make better judgments by avoiding fixed beliefs or dogmatic positions. So in that sense, the idea of the scientific method of provisionality and trying to falsify things in order to make better judgments ties in with that too. Do you see a connection there as well?
Well, I think provisionality and the testing of hypotheses and all that kind of thing, which are part of the idealized scientific method, yes, they're definitely part of that. The problem is that although scientists talk as if that's the method they're following, a great many of them are not following that at all. A great deal of science is actually motivated by non-provisional dogmas. I mean, for most scientists, the dogmas of materialism, memories are stored in the brain, matter's unconscious, nature's mechanical, the mind's nothing but the activity of the brain. These are not lightly held provisional hypotheses. They're ones that are deep convictions or deep-seated beliefs, and any challenge to them is greeted not with sort of open-minded, oh, well, let's talk about that, but instead anger and derision. I know only too well from personal experience that provisionality, consideration of the evidence, open-minded balancing of evidence on one side or the other are ideals. And I know some scientists who do live that way and put them into practice, but in reality, much of science doesn't work that way, and I wish it did. So let's say they're ideals rather than realities within science, and that the sciences themselves can benefit from the middle way.
Well, I, for one, Rupert, I'm very pleased that you're out there challenging these assumptions. And as you said at the beginning of the talk, I think a lot of people in the scientific community are grateful for that too. Maybe they see you as some sort of gadfly, and I think that if nothing else, you're playing a very important role there.
Oh, thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, anyway, it's been great to talk to you today, Rupert, and good luck with your work. I'll follow it with interest.
Very good. Thanks very much.
You can find out more about middle way philosophy at www.middlewaysociety.org.